Hey guys, today we're going to read chapters 4 and 5 from Malala, and that's the end of part 1 of the book. I am Malala. So, chapter 4 is called A Warning from God. One autumn day when I was still in primary school, our desk started to tremble and shake. Earthquake! We yelled. We ran outside, some of us falling as we crowded through the narrow door and gathered around our teachers for safety and comfort, like chicks around a mother hen. A few of the girls were crying. We lived in a region where earthquakes happened often, but this felt very different. Even after we returned to class, the buildings continued to shake. The rumbling didn't stop. Miss Olfat, my all-time favorite teacher, like Miss Nada, told us to stay calm. She assured us that it would be over soon. But when another strong earthquake hit within a few minutes of the first, the students were sent home. When I arrived home, I found my mother sitting in the courtyard, where she felt safest because there was no roof above her. She was reciting verses from the Holy Quran as tears streamed down her face. The aftershocks kept coming and continued past nightfall, and every time they did, my mother ran outside and insisted we go with her. My father told her to not upset the children, but we were already upset because the ground was shaking. That earthquake of October 8th, 2005 turned out to be one of the worst in history. It was 7.6 on the Richter scale and felt as far away as Kabul and Delhi. Aftershocks continued for at least a month. Our city of Mingora was largely spared, but the northern areas of Pakistan, including our beloved Shangla, were devastated. What do you think devastated means? I think you can figure that one out. When we finally heard from our family and friends there, they said they had thought it was the end of the world. They described the roar of rocks sliding down hills and everyone running out of their houses, reciting the Holy Quran, the screams as roofs crashed down, and the howls of buffalo and goats. They were terrified, and then, when the destruction stopped, they waited for help. The government was slow to arrive, but help came immediately from rescue workers from a conservative religious group called Tariq-e-Nifaz-e-Sharia-e-Muhammadi. I'm so sorry, I know I messed that up. But the initials are TNSM, also called the Movement for the Enforcement of Islamic Law, led by Sufi Muhammad and his son-in-law, Maulana Fuzlala. Eventually, the government tried to help, and aid from the Americans, who had troops and helicopters in nearby Afghanistan, made it in. But most of the volunteers and medical help came from organizations that were linked with militant groups, like the TNSM. I think that this is an important part because as I'm reading this, all I'm thinking is, I didn't expect an earthquake. Like, how is this earthquake fitting in? But I think what we're just hearing right now is that the group who came in to help save them is a militant group. I want you to have a think about what is a militant group. They helped clear and rebuild destroyed villages. They led prayers and buried bodies. They took in many of the 11,000 orphan children. In our culture, orphans are usually adopted by the extended family. But the earthquake had been so bad that entire families had been wiped out or lost everything and were in no position to care for additional children. Many of the orphans went to live in fundamentalist madrasas. I think we're going to have to think about that. We're going to have to look that up. What is a fundamentalist madras? Also, extended family, what does that mean? Your mom and your dad and your brothers and sisters, those are your immediate family. But when you start talking about your grandparents and your aunts and your uncles and your cousins and great aunts and great uncles, that's your extended family. Mullahs from the TNSM preached that the earthquake was a warning from God. If we did not mend our ways and introduce Sharia, or Islamic law, more severe punishment would come. The whole country was in shock for a long time after the earthquake. We were vulnerable, which made it that much easier for someone with bad intentions to use a nation's fear for his gain. All right, that was chapter 4, and we're going to have a lot to talk about with that. Chapter 5, the first direct threat. Each morning, as my friends passed through the gate to school, a man across the street stood scowling at us. Then, one night, he arrived at our home, along with 6 elders from the community. I answered the door. He claimed to be a mufti, or an Islamic scholar, and said he had a problem with the school. My father shooed me into the other room as this mufti and the elders crowded into our little house, but I heard every word. I am representing good Muslims, the mufti said, and we all think your girls' high school is a blasphemy. A blasphemy is like against God. You should close it. Teenage girls should not be going to school. They should be in purdah. This mufti was clearly under the influence of a Malala, who had been running an illegal radio broadcast through which he gave sermons and railed against people who he deemed un-Islamic. This is a kind of hard part to understand, but I think what it's telling us is that there are these people who are taking over, and they are saying girls shouldn't be allowed to go to school, that it's against Islam. And so after this earthquake, all of these people are coming in, and they're changing the way things happen in their village. And again, we see Malala's dad trying to protect her. So page 33, what we knew, but the mufti did not, was that his own niece attended my father's school in secret. As my father debated with the mufti, one of the elders spoke up. I heard you were not a pious man, the man said to my father, but there are Qurans here in your home. Pious means that you're religious. Of course there are, my father said. I'm a Muslim. The mufti jumped back into the conversation, complaining about girls entering the school through the same gate that men also used. Think about that. So my father came up with a compromise. The older girls would enter through a different gate. Eventually the mufti backed down and the men left. But even as the door shut behind them, I had a knot in my stomach. I had grown up watching stubborn, prideful Pashtun men. Generally, when a Pashtun man loses an argument, he never really forgets or forgives. Even though I was a child, I knew this man was mistaken. I had studied the Quran, our holy book, since I was 5, and my parents sent me to a madrasa for religious studies in the afternoons when school finished. It was an open-air mosque where boys and girls studied the Holy Quran together. I loved learning the Arabic alphabet. I loved the strange and mysterious shapes of the letters, the sounds of the prayers as we all recited together, and the stories about how to live a life according to the readings or teachings of Allah. My teacher there was a woman. She was kind and wise. For me, the madrasa was a place for religious education only. I would go to the Kushal school for all of my other studies. So that's her dad's school where she goes for her regular studies. And then the madrasa is where she goes for her religious studies. But for many of these children, the madrasa would be the only place they would ever study. They wouldn't take any other classes. No science, math, no literature. They would study only Arabic so they could recite the Holy Quran. They didn't learn what the words actually meant, though, only how to say them. So they just learned how to say the words, but they didn't know what they were reading or saying. I didn't think much of this difference until later, after the mufti's visit to our house. One day I was playing with the neighborhood children in the alley, and when we were choosing up sides for a game of cricket, one of the boys said he didn't want me on his team. Our school is better than yours, he said, as if that explained things. I didn't agree one bit. My school is the better one, I said. Your school is bad, he insisted. It is not on the straight path of Islam. I didn't know what to make of this, but I knew he was wrong. My school was a heaven. Because inside the Cushall School, we flew on wings of knowledge. I love those words. They flew on wings of knowledge. In a country where women weren't allowed out in public without a man, we girls traveled far and wide inside the pages of our books. In a land where many women can't read the prices in the markets, we did multiplication. And in a place where, as soon as we were teenagers, we'd have to cover our heads and hide ourselves from the boys who'd been our childhood playmates, we ran as free as the wind. We didn't know where our education would take us. All we wanted was a chance to learn in peace. And that is what we did. The crazy world could carry on outside the walls of the Cushall School. Inside, we could be who we were. Our only concerns, once we dropped our school bags in the classroom, were the same as any child's at school. Who would get the highest grade on the day's test, and who would sit with whom at recess? It was a point of pride for me that almost every year in primary school, I won the trophy for first place at the end of the term. I was considered one of the top girls. And the principal's daughter, and some girls thought maybe there was a connection between the two, but it was a point of pride for my father that he gave me no special treatment. And the proof was obvious to everyone when a new girl came to school when I was about 9. Her name was Malka Inur, and she was bright and determined, but I did not think she was nearly as clever as me. So on the last day of school that year, when the awards were announced, I was stunned. What does stunned mean? She had gotten first place, and I was second. I smiled politely as she received her trophy, but the minute I got home, I burst into tears. When my father saw me, he comforted me, but not in the way I wanted. "It's a good thing to come in second," he said, "because you learn that if you can win, you can lose. And you should learn to be a good loser, not just a good winner." I was too young and too stubborn to appreciate his words, and truth be told, I still prefer to be first. But after that term, I worked extra hard so I would never have to learn that particular lesson again. Another of my regular worries was whether Maniba was angry with me. She was my best friend, bookish, like me, almost like my twin. We sat together whenever we could, on the bus at recess, in the classroom, and she made me laugh as no one else could. But we had a habit of fighting, and always over the same thing, when another girl came between us. "Are you my friend or hers?" Maniba would say if I sat with another girl at recess. "Maniba," I'd say, "you are the one ignoring me." The worst part was when Maniba would refuse to talk to me, and then I would get angry at her for being so angry at me. Sometimes these spats would last for days. Eventually, I would miss her too much, and I would take responsibility for the fight. I seemed to always take the blame. And then she would make a funny face, and we'd fall apart laughing and forget our differences, until the next time another girl came between us. How could a place where I learned so much and laughed so much be bad? What's that place she's talking about? I think it's her school, the Cushall School. So now we're finished with part 1, so this is going to be part 2 that we're going to start tomorrow. I've got lots of questions for you. I feel like these were really important parts.